Hey, it's John here from John Still Runs. How useful to runners is this measurement known as heart rate variability? How useful is it for us runners? Do we need to pay any attention to HRV? I'm going to explore that a little bit today, and as it starts to rain, we might look at going for a run a bit later. So let's talk about HRV. Well, I haven't quite gone for a run. It'll come, hopefully, a bit later on. What exactly is heart rate variability? And before we delve into its usefulness for runners, why don't we explain what it is to the best of my knowledge, limited as it is, into the physiology of HRV. So you've heard of heart rate, of course, everybody has, and it's a useful metric too, of course. In the morning, if your heart rate is a little at rest, if it's a little higher than normal, then maybe by 5 or 10 beats, you're probably overtraining or fatigued or getting sick. But HRV, or heart rate variability, is different to heart rate. Do you know the time between each beat is measured by your Garmin watch, or mine anyway, my Instinct 2S, and that time will vary, and apparently the healthy heart will vary more than the unhealthy heart. So a heart that's beating metronomically with the same time between beats is less adaptive to sudden stresses than the one that can vary a lot, up to 100 milliseconds perhaps, or more, heart rate variability. So yeah, if you have an emergency, a flight, fright, or fight situation coming up, having a heart with good heart rate variability above whatever that number should be, and we'll talk about what that number should be in a minute. There are different ways of measuring that time between beats, but the most common one, I think, is something called RMSS, root mean something seconds. Anyway, that's the most common measure, and you'll find that in most of your devices that does such. A good number will be varying from individual to individual, and it'll probably be above 25 to 50. Mine seems to be roughly 50 at rest most of the time. When it's down, then yeah, I think probably there is a bit of cortisol going through my body, stressing me a little bit, or it's there as the result of stress. Perhaps the stress is not causing the cortisol, or the cortisol is not causing the stress. Probably mutual relationship there. How useful is that number for me in the morning when I measure it? And how do I measure it? Well, I use a Garmin metric called Health Snapshot. And so for 2 minutes, sitting quietly, you can get 5 readings. Heart rate, SpO2, which is oxygen saturation, your respiration rate, your stress level, and HRV. So I guess I use the HRV there, and Health Snapshot assists me in getting a nice quick way of measuring those metrics. How useful is it for runners? Well, that's a moot point. Not a mute point, a moot point. In the context of helping runners, how does Health Snapshot assist me? Well, probably not very much, actually. I guess I haven't had many, if any, really abnormal readings If my heart rate is slightly high, I might make that run, mostly a Garmin daily suggested workout, a little easier. I'll downgrade it a little. But I use other measures there too, such as performance condition, as I start running. And just started accessing something called training readiness, which is also useful. But what does SpO2 and breathing rate, part of Health Snapshot, do and help me? Well, probably very little actually, but it's always a good number, those numbers, and it hasn't gone down. If I had asthma or some sort of pulmonary condition, that could be quite useful for me. And what about the others? Stress and HRV. Well, I think from my understanding, stress, the stress number that you get, which is an index, I think, from 0 to 100, it relates very heavily to what's measured on the HRV. So you could look at that stress number instead of the HRV. But how does it change my run anyway? It probably doesn't change it all that much. I'll still go for a run and I'll still enjoy it. I might downgrade it if the numbers are poor, and I might upgrade it if the numbers are good. But mostly I think we go by how we feel, which may or may not be the best thing, but it works for me, having been sensitive to how I feel for many, many years, particularly in the area of running. So I hope that's a little bit useful for you. Yeah, have a look at that number. If you've got a Garmin, use Health Snapshot and see what you get. Keep a little bit of a record, as I have for a while, and watch the numbers change or increase, decrease, depending on how you feel.